I don't usually paint flowers. I've done it a few times over the years, but it's a subject that I feel like is not my forte. But this spring when I was on a walk, I took a picture of some irises in one of my neighbor's yards, and they were just so beautiful, like the way they were planted in mass, and the way you had the dark green stems and leaves behind, and these really pretty white irises in the sunlight, morning light. So I took a picture of them, and now I'm like, I'm going to paint them. Let's do this. So here's a video showing how I did it, and I'll kind of talk through things. Unfortunately, I have not yet figured out a good way to show my palette and be able to paint at my easel. So I'm not painting flat with like the painting laying flat and then my palette next to it. But I'm working on that. So I'll talk through the colors that I'm mixing. So what I'm doing here is I am starting with just a sketch, kind of figuring out where I want things placed. And I'm sketching with a mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. That's kind of my go-to. That's my go-to for toning panels, for underpaintings, for tonal paintings, for sketching. I use that color combination a lot, and I like it for a number of reasons. It can be cool if it has more blue in it. It can be very warm if it has more burnt sienna in it. And it can be a really interesting black. You can make it a blue black or more of a brown black. You can cover the whole gambit of grays. Like there's just so much you can do with that color combination. So that's my go-to. And I'm just kind of sketching them out loosely. I'm My problem with flowers is that I always get lost in the details. Like it overwhelms me, all the tiny little petals and the variations of colors. So what I'm really trying to do with these is focus on the bigger shapes and more of the feel of them, as opposed to like everything being botanically accurate. I'm using a Princeton hog's bristle brush to sketch it out. Again, just to kind of keep it loose. I don't want to use a really tiny, tight brush. Sometimes I do sketches with a pencil ahead of time, or with charcoal, or with more of a like a sharp flat brush or a rigger or something like that, where I can get like a cleaner line. But I'm not trying to do that here. I'm just trying to get the overall like big shapes done. So let me go over the colors that are on my palette and the substrate I'm working on. The colors I have are working from left to right on my palette. I have ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Oh, actually, I have ultramarine blue, then viridian, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium lemon, and flake lead white replacement. And I'm not using any, I do have reds on my palette, but I don't use them in this at all. I use primarily burnt sienna as my red, unless I'm painting something red, that like cherries or strawberries or apples or something where I need, or red barn, something where I need like a red. I tend to use burnt sienna as the red because I like to mix kind of cooler colors. So what I've done now is I'm adding in, I'm creating kind of the darkest colors surrounding the irises. So that's still a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And I've thinned it down with just a tiny, tiny bit of Gamsol, just to have it move a little bit easier so it's not thick. And burnt sienna and ultramarine blue are both in the Winsor Newton line, and actually burnt sienna is Winsor Newton. Ultramarine blue is Michael Harding. I like the ultramarine blue in Winsor Newton as well, or Utrecht. Those are, they're transparent. So they're going to be good colors to mix to kind of scrub on as an underpainting. They're not opaque. So I'm trying to outline the irises a little bit further with the darkest darks. So I'm mixing kind of a dark Well, in this case, it's kind of more of a brown, a dark brown. I'm still sort of staying with the tonal painting and just scrubbing in where the darks are. Sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. I don't always start paintings exactly the same. It depends for me a lot on the subject. Like if I'm working on a dog, especially like a pet portrait, that like this is not just any lab. This is a specific lab that belongs to someone, and it's very important that that lab looks exactly like their lab. So start that out with a transfer of a sketch so that I spend a lot more time on that front end to make sure everything is really accurate. But for something like a still life or a landscape where it doesn't have to be that specific, I'll just sort of sketch it out a bit more loosely on the panel. And the substrate that I'm working with or working on is a plywood panel, and I buy them raw and then I apply 2 coats of gesso and then tone them with that mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and some Gamsol. And just so I'll do that ahead of time so that I have these panels all ready to go. And this is an 8x10. And then I do paint from life sometimes, and I paint a lot though from photographs just because it's easy. I can set it up and take a lot of different photographs of different angles, especially like a still life, or if I'm out on a walk and see flowers like I did, I can just snap a picture and take a few maybe different angles and stuff. So I have this big library to work from. And this image is available on Artist Reference Photos, which is a royalty-free reference photo site. So you can download this exact photo for free and you can paint it as well. You can paint it as it's cropped, or you can always crop it, change it up, make it your own. So I'm still scrubbing in some darks and midtones, and this is just, it's going to make it then when I lay in the color that all I really have to do is focus on the color, which for this I felt was really important because the whole picture is green and white, really, with a little bit of yellow. It's all shades of green, blue greens, yellow greens, dark greens, light greens. It's just this parade of greens, and then the irises really are shades of white. And so when you're working on a subject that is seemingly so simple, like such a simple palette, I think it's really important to get those values right so that things that are further back look further back, things that are forward look like they're forward, things that are in the light, you can really read that. You can read that there's light shining on certain things while other things are in shadow. And so that's why I'm taking that time to really figure out like where the darkest parts of the painting are and where the lighter parts are. And so this is I probably do this till about 10 minutes in the painting, sort of figuring out where I want those lightest lights and darkest darks, just working in that mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Okay, so I have the greens finished enough, and so I'm ready to move on to the irises. And I mix up ultramarine blue, burnt sienna to get a gray, and then add in white to make it lighter, and then a touch of yellow ochre. I had to think about that for a second. A touch of yellow ochre just to warm it up a little bit. I don't want, so when you're mixing grays like this, you have to be really careful to make sure that they are colorful grays, that they have some kind of color to them. If you're mixing up like a battleship gray, everything's going to look really drab. And when you start to train your eye to see grays for the color that they actually are, um, I think you can make more interesting choices when you're painting. Like to me, these shadows all looked very blue. Sometimes shadows look um, very purple. They can look green, yellow. I mean, all it can be all grays can be all kinds of colors. And I think as soon as I figured that out, I started to my paintings looked more alive and interesting, especially in painting a lot of animals that are very neutral in color. A lot of animals I paint are solid black or they're white or they're shades of brown. And so, speaking of cats, my cat just jumped up. You might hear her talking. But I had to learn to find those colors in the neutrals and in the grays to make them more interesting. And it's been a it's been a really fun journey. I can see in my earlier paintings how they look, my earlier pet paintings, how they look very gray and a little less interesting. And then now I can see all those subtle color shifts that I'm finding. And it's something I'm still working on and growing in. But it's something that I really enjoy doing. And I've been surprised at how much purple there is in animal fur. It's like been a fun thing to discover. It's like, man, this whole dog is like purple. Um, it's I think it's fun as an artist when you have those moments of like seeing things in a new way, and it kind of unlocks this new level in painting. So what I'm doing here is I'm again, as I said, I'm kind of finding the color in the grays, and I'm shifting this gray like a little bit. It's a little lighter in places, a little darker in places, a little bit bluer in some areas, a little warmer. And I'm trying to, it looks very haphazard right now, but I'm trying to look at where do I see the shadows? Where do I see the darker parts of the irises? And what this does is it gives them form. I think especially when you're new at painting, it's tempting to see the whole iris is just like white. And you really do have to train your eye to see all those little subtle variations of where, no, it's really not white. It's blue there, or it's not white, it's yellow there. So I'm kind of adding in those shadows. I've also come to really love the painting process of letting it look really weird and haphazard, but knowing where I'm going with it. And that's one thing I love about watching people paint, like when you have that opportunity, whether it's on a YouTube video or on shows like Portrait Artist of the Year or Landscape Artist of the Year, and watching the process, and you're like, it looks crazy to me now. I have no idea where they're going. And that's just a part of, I think, being an artist is sort of creating that process, creating how you see and how you're going to interpret what you see. And even watching myself do it, it's kind of fun to see like, oh, that's interesting that I am working on that. It just doesn't seem intuitive when I watch it later, but in the moment it's like, oh, this is what I want to work on next. I do a little bit of adjusting to make sure that the center of the iris is the darkest part of the iris, because as I'm observing, that is where the darkest part is. That's where all the shadows are, because it's kind of, the iris kind of, folds into itself there. And so I'm trying to make that adjustment. Especially when you're working on something that's one color, like the iris is pretty much all white. It's so important to ask those questions of, is this lighter or darker than what's next to it? Is this warmer or cooler? I ask myself a lot of questions like in my head, to make those adjustments. I'm also trying to be decisive when I put a mark down and not get too fiddly with it. I do get fiddly sometimes, and kind of, because one thing that was important to me too with the irises is to make sure that the lines that needed to be soft were soft. I didn't want these to be, while the blades of leaves could be sort of slabs with hard lines, I want all the lines within the irises to feel really soft. So they do have that kind of delicate feel to them. Another thing that's really important when you're working with whites is I think it's better to have the whites be a little bit darker, sort of more mid-tone, and then like keep pushing it a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. If you start too light, then there's nowhere to go. Like we can only go as white as the white on our palette. We can't get any whiter than that. So same thing with the darks. We can't get any darker than mixing black paint. So or using black out of the tube. So we have to make sure that we have, a way to go. And I have found that with whites too, that if you go straight to the straight white too fast, or white with a little bit of yellow too fast, then you can't find those like the highest highs. And some people that I have learned from, they'll actually start by putting the darkest dark and the lightest light on the panel or on the canvas. And I just don't, that's not really how I started out. That's not what I learned. So I don't normally work that way. I sort of have learned working dark to light, but I have learned to be more restrained with how I'm mixing my whites and starting a little bit darker than what I think, than where I think I need to start, knowing that I can always kind of continue to lift it up. But I want to make sure that the parts of the irises that are truly a bright white, that have like the strongest sun shining off of them, which is kind of that lower petal that faces just a little bit more upwards, that's reflecting the most light. I want to save my whitest white for that. So I'm just sort of playing with that, the variations of whites here, and giving those irises some form. Okay, so I have the irises painted in, and now I'm coming back and sort of tweaking the whole painting. So as I'm painting like the greens, the blades of, I keep saying blades of grass, but I mean the leaves. They just sort of look like big blades of grass to me. But as I'm painting the iris leaves, I'm sort of focused on exactly what I'm painting, and now I'm looking at the painting as a whole, and how does everything relate together. And what I'm seeing is the buds that I painted weren't quite bright enough. They're getting like a little bit lost in all the leaves and stems, and so I want to bring those out a little bit more and bring out some of the highlights a little bit more, especially in that upper right section. That's where the sun was catching the leaves and stems the most, and so I wanted to make sure that that was reading well. I'm also paying attention to the variation of greens that I have. There's, as I said, there's like a wide variety of greens in here, from really blue greens to yellow greens, some that are really bright and vibrant, and some that are more muted and kind of more olives and sages. And so I want to make sure that as I'm working around that I've retained those individual greens and I'm not making things look too much the same. And I'm defining some shapes as well. Some areas definitely are and can be more abstract, and I'll kind of show that close up, but I do want to make sure they're reading as like, this is the stem for this iris, this is maybe a stem for another iris behind, this is a leaf. And I also want to make sure I'm retaining like what's in shadow and what's catching more of the light. And I've used the same brush for this whole painting. I usually do kind of mix up between using hog's bristle brushes and synthetic brushes, like a flat, ivory flat, something like that. I really like the red dot brushes from Rosemary & Co. But for this painting, the hog's bristle brush just felt right. It felt like the right brush to use because I did want it to be more painterly. It felt like there was a lot of the same texture going on in the painting. So I ended up not switching and just using the same brush the whole time, which, like I said, I don't normally do. Usually I'll use a smooth, like a synthetic bristle brush that'll make smoother strokes, a hog's bristle brush for when I want texture, and then sometimes a palette knife for when I want like a lot of paint, but I want it smoothed out a bit more. I don't use a ton of brushes. I know a lot of artists can, use dozens of brushes on one painting. I tend to use probably no more than 4. And I have kind of my go-tos that I just pick up again and again. But when I'm working with a brush, usually I don't switch until I feel the need to switch, till I feel like, oh, this brush is way too big for this, or I'm getting texture that I don't really want, or I want more texture than what I'm getting, and then I'll switch. I don't just switch just for the sake of switching. I switch when I feel that need to switch. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I painted these irises. As I said, I'm trying to figure out the best way to show my palette as well. I'm working on that, setting up a better camera arrangement so you're not seeing the painting from such an extreme angle, and then also how I can still paint like the way I paint, having the painting up on the easel instead of laying flat, and having my palette on my lap, all of that. So anyway, I will figure that out so that I can share some more painting tutorials and we can paint some more things together.